forgotten officers of the Arab Revolt, warriors between empires. You know the story, galloping horses across desert sands, Lawrence of Arabia, the daring revolt that helped topple an empire. But what history often leaves out is what happened to those Arab officers who gambled everything, their careers, their lives, their very futures, to fight alongside the British against their Ottoman rulers. These weren't just nameless figures in flowing robes. They were professional military men, trained in Istanbul's elite academies, who turned against their Ottoman commanders to forge a new Arab future. A future that, for many of them, would look nothing like what they had been promised. The empire's last gamble. The year is 1916. The Ottoman Empire, the sick man of Europe for over a century, has aligned with Germany in a desperate bid to maintain its crumbling dominance across 3 continents, from the Balkans to the Arabian Peninsula, from the Caucasus to North Africa. Sultan Mehmed V's empire stretches thin across territories where nationalist movements simmer beneath the surface of imperial control. In the ancient city of Mecca, cradle of Islam and spiritual heart of the Muslim world, tension fills the air like the desert heat. Sharif Hussein bin Ali, the Hashemite guardian of Islam's holiest sites, has been engaged in a delicate correspondence with British High Commissioner Sir Henry McMahon in Cairo. The letters, written in formal Arabic calligraphy, promise support for Arab independence in exchange for revolt against Ottoman rule. On the 10th of June, 1916, as the morning call to prayer echoes across Mecca's minarets, Hussein fires the first shot of rebellion from his palace window, a symbolic gesture that reverberates across the Arab world. The Arab Revolt has begun. But the rebellion initially flounders like a ship without a compass. Hussein's tribal warriors, brave but undisciplined, lack the military expertise to challenge Ottoman forces effectively. Their weapons are outdated, their tactics medieval, their supply lines non-existent. The revolution that promised to sweep across the Arabian Peninsula from Mecca to Damascus threatens to die in its birthplace. Until Arab officers, many former prisoners of war held by the British in camps across Egypt and India, step in to transform a tribal uprising into a disciplined military campaign that would reshape the Middle East forever. The Ottoman Academy Elite. If you value documented military history like this, subscribe. It's the best way to support our work. Also, comment from which city you're hearing this from. The script is researched and factual, using sources from official British War Cabinet documents, the private papers of T.A. Lawrence, housed in the Bodleian Library at Oxford, Ottoman military archives in Istanbul, and French Foreign Ministry files from the Quai d'Orsay, which reveal the calculated promises made to Arab officers and their subsequent treatment after the war. Now, back to the information. These weren't just any soldiers. These were Ottoman-trained military professionals who had risen through the ranks of what was then one of the most formidable armies in the Middle East. The Ottoman military academy system, modeled after Prussian institutions, had produced a generation of highly skilled Arab officers who understood modern warfare, artillery, logistics, and command structure. Consider Jafar al-Askari, born in Baghdad in 1885 to a prominent Kurdish family. His father, a respected judge, had sent him to Istanbul's Imperial Military Academy, where he excelled in mathematics and military engineering. Young Jafar spoke Turkish, Arabic, German, and French fluently. He was everything the Ottoman Empire wanted in its officer corps: educated, loyal, and brilliant. After graduation, al-Askari was selected for advanced training in Berlin, where he studied under German military instructors who were modernizing the Ottoman army. He learned about machine guns, field artillery, trench warfare, and the industrial logistics that were transforming 20th century combat. When World War I erupted, he fought with distinction on multiple fronts, earning the Iron Cross Second Class, a rare honor for a non-German officer. Then came his capture by British forces in Egypt during 1916, while serving as a staff officer in the Ottoman Fourth Army. In the British prisoner of war camp at Kantara, along the Suez Canal, al-Askari met other captured Arab officers who would become his lifelong comrades and rivals. Among them was Nouri al-Said, born in Baghdad in 1888 to a modest middle-class family. His father was a minor Ottoman bureaucrat who scraped together enough money to send his brilliant son to the military college in Istanbul. Nouri specialized in artillery, becoming an expert in the German-made field guns that formed the backbone of Ottoman firepower. Unlike the aristocratic al-Askari, Nouri was a self-made man who understood the struggles of ordinary Arabs under Ottoman rule. He had witnessed firsthand the empire's policy of Turkification, the systematic replacement of Arabic with Turkish in schools, courts, and military units. Arab officers were increasingly sidelined in favor of Turkish and German advisors. The prisoners at Kantara also included Aziz Ali al-Misri, an Egyptian-born officer who had served in the Ottoman General Staff, Maulud Mukhles, a Kurdish officer from Suleymania, and dozens of other Arab professionals who had devoted their careers to Ottoman service, only to find themselves increasingly marginalized as the empire embraced Turkish nationalism. The Great Betrayal of Damascus. But what finally drove these men to switch sides? The answer lies in the blood-soaked streets of Damascus on the 6th of May, 1915. On that day, Jamal Pasha, the Ottoman governor of Syria and one of the triumvirate ruling the empire, ordered the public execution of 11 prominent Arab intellectuals and political leaders in Marjah Square. The condemned men included journalists, poets, lawyers, and former parliamentary deputies who had advocated for Arab rights within the Ottoman system. They weren't revolutionaries or separatists. They were reformers who believed the empire could accommodate Arab aspirations while maintaining its unity. Among those hanged was Abd al-Karim al-Khalil, a respected lawyer and member of the Ottoman parliament who had drafted legislation to protect Arab cultural rights. Another was Shukri al-Asali, a former governor of Nazareth who had tried to bridge Turkish and Arab communities. Their only crime was signing petitions calling for Arabic to be recognized alongside Turkish as an official language in Arab provinces. The executions continued the following year. On the 21st of August, Roars, 1916, 21 more Arab leaders were hanged in Damascus and Beirut. The Ottoman authorities displayed their bodies in public squares as a warning to others who might question Turkish dominance. News of these executions spread through Arab officer circles like wildfire. Many had known the victims personally. They were classmates from law school, fellow members of literary societies, or relatives. The message was clear: there was no place for Arab identity within the new Ottoman order. For officers like al-Askari and al-Said, sitting in British prison camps, the executions confirmed what they had long suspected. The empire they had served faithfully was determined to erase their very identity. The choice became stark: remain loyal to a regime that viewed them as second-class citizens, or join a rebellion that promised to restore Arab dignity. The McMahon-Hussein correspondence, Promises in the Desert. The British, masters of imperial manipulation, understood exactly how to exploit this discontent. The McMahon-Hussein correspondence, a series of 10 letters exchanged between July 1915 and March 1916, painted a tantalizing vision that seemed to answer every Arab aspiration. Sir Henry McMahon, writing from his office in Cairo's residency, promised Sharif Hussein an independent Arab kingdom that would stretch from the 37th parallel in the north, just south of Aleppo, to the Indian Ocean in the south, and from the Mediterranean Sea to the borders of Persia. This would include modern-day Syria, Iraq, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, and parts of Turkey. The letters, written in flowery diplomatic Arabic, spoke of Britain's desire to see the Arab nation achieve its rightful place among the world's peoples. McMahon wrote, "Great Britain is prepared to recognize and support the independence of the Arabs in all the regions within the limits demanded by the Sharif of Mecca." For Arab officers reading these promises in prison camps, the vision was intoxicating. After centuries of Ottoman rule, followed by decades of increasing Turkish domination, here was a chance to create a modern Arab state that would combine Islamic values with European technology and military organization. The letters promised more than just independence. They suggested that Britain would provide the military support, financial backing, and international recognition necessary to make Arab independence a reality. For professional soldiers like al-Askari and al-Said, this meant the chance to build new armies, new institutions, and new nations from the ground up. The birth of the Sharifian Army. By late 1916, the British had facilitated the creation of the regular Arab army, known as the Sharifian Army after Hussein's family name. This wasn't the irregular tribal cavalry that captures our romantic imagination in films and novels. This was a professional fighting force of former Ottoman Arab prisoners of war, who donned British-style uniforms with traditional keffiyehs, a symbolic fusion of European military efficiency with Arab cultural identity. The transformation took place in training camps near Aqaba and Yenbo, where British instructors worked alongside Arab officers to create something entirely new in Middle Eastern warfare. The soldiers learned to use British Lee Enfield rifles, Lewis machine guns, and 18-pound field artillery pieces. They practiced coordinated infantry attacks, cavalry charges, and the demolition techniques that would make the Arab forces so effective against Ottoman supply lines. Under commanders like al-Askari and al-Said, they formed the backbone of Faisal's Northern Army, named after Hussein's third son, who emerged as the most charismatic and militarily capable of the Hashemite princes. Faisal, tall and dignified with penetrating eyes and a carefully trimmed beard, combined royal authority with genuine military skill. Unlike his brothers Ali and Abdullah, who preferred political maneuvering. Faisal understood that Arab independence would be won on the battlefield. The regular Arab army grew from a few hundred volunteers in late 1916 to nearly 25,000 disciplined soldiers by 1918. They were organized into 4 regiments, each commanded by former Ottoman officers who had proven their loyalty to the Arab cause. The 1st Regiment, commanded by al-Askari himself, became known as the elite unit that spearheaded the most difficult operations. These weren't just soldiers, they were the future leaders of the Arab world in training. Many of the junior officers would later become generals, ministers, and even heads of state in the post-war Middle East. They shared a common experience of betraying their original oaths to the Ottoman Sultan and gambling their futures on the promise of Arab independence. The Railway War, the Arab Revolt's most famous achievement, was the systematic destruction of the Hejaz Railway, the Ottoman Empire's logistical lifeline connecting Istanbul to Medina and Mecca. This 1,500-kilometer railway, completed in 1908, had been built with donations from Muslims worldwide as a symbol of Islamic unity and Ottoman strength. Now it became the target of Arab dynamite and British expertise. E. Hall Lawrence, working with Arab demolition teams, perfected the technique of destroying railway bridges and track sections in ways that would cause maximum disruption while requiring maximum Ottoman resources to repair. But the Railway War was more than romantic adventure. It was a sophisticated military strategy designed by professional Arab officers. Nouri al-Said, with his artillery expertise, calculated precisely where to place explosive charges for maximum effect. Al-Askari planned coordinated attacks that would isolate Ottoman garrisons and force them to surrender or withdraw. The psychological impact was enormous. Ottoman soldiers, many of them Arabs, conscripted from the same regions now in revolt, found themselves guarding supply lines that were constantly under attack by their own countrymen. Desertion rates soared as Arab conscripts crossed lines to join Faisal's forces. By early 1918, the Hejaz Railway had become almost unusable south of Mayan, Ottoman forces in Medina. Including the holy sites they were sworn to protect, were effectively cut off from Constantinople. The Arab strategy of guerrilla warfare, combined with conventional military operations, had achieved what direct confrontation never could have accomplished. The Battle of Ma'an, professional warfare in the desert. April 19, 1918, Ma'an railway station in what is now southern Jordan. The sun rises over red sandstone cliffs as Jafar al-Askari leads the Arab regular army in the most challenging operation of the revolt, a frontal assault on the heavily defended Ottoman fortress town of Ma'an. Ma'an wasn't just another railway stop. It was the key to controlling southern Syria and opening the road to Damascus. The Ottoman garrison, commanded by experienced Turkish officers and reinforced with German machine gunners, had turned the town into a fortress. Stone buildings became gun positions. Railway embankments became trenches, and the station itself became a command bunker surrounded by barbed wire and mines. Al-Askari's assault plan demonstrated the sophistication that Arab officers brought to desert warfare. Unlike the tribal raids that characterized the early revolt, this was a coordinated attack involving infantry, cavalry, artillery, and close air support from British aircraft. The Arab artillery, under Nouri al-Said's direction, began a systematic bombardment of Ottoman positions at dawn. The attack began with a feint from the east, drawing Ottoman defenders away from the main assault routes. Then Arab infantry, trained in British tactics but fighting with Arab determination, advanced in coordinated waves. They moved from cover to cover, using the rocky terrain to mask their approach while maintaining disciplined fire control. The battle raged for 3 days. Ottoman machine guns cut down Arab attackers, but the Arabs regrouped and attacked again. Al-Askari, leading from the front in the tradition of Ottoman officers, was wounded in the shoulder but refused evacuation. The sight of their commander, bandaged but still directing operations, inspired his men to extraordinary efforts. On the 3rd day, Arab forces broke through the Ottoman perimeter and engaged in brutal house-to-house fighting. The town changed hands building by building, room by room. Ottoman resistance was fierce. These were professional soldiers fighting for their empire and their lives. But Arab determination proved stronger. The attack ended with heavy casualties on both sides, but succeeded in cutting off the Ottoman garrison from reinforcement or retreat. More importantly, it demonstrated that Arab forces could conduct complex military operations against fortified positions, a capability that would prove crucial in the final drive toward Damascus. During the siege, al-Askari, ever the pragmatic professional, repeatedly requested permission from his British allies to use mustard gas against the Ottoman defenders. Chemical weapons had proven devastatingly effective on the Western Front, and al-Askari saw no reason not to employ every available tool to minimize Arab casualties and maximize Ottoman suffering. The British refused, officially citing concern for civilian populations, but privately worried about the precedent of providing chemical weapons to Arab forces, who might later use them against European interests. This refusal would be remembered by Arab officers as another example of British duplicity. They would provide rifles and gold, but not the most effective weapons in their arsenal. The race to Damascus. Meanwhile, as al-Askari's forces besieged Ma'an, Nuri al-Said served as chief of staff for the Northern Arab Army's advance through what would become Jordan and Syria. His artillery expertise proved crucial during the lightning campaign that followed the collapse of Ottoman resistance in the summer of 1918. The Northern Army's advance was a masterpiece of mobile warfare, unlike the static trench fighting that characterized the Western Front. The Arab campaign combined rapid movement with devastating attacks on Ottoman supply lines. Arab cavalry units, led by tribal sheikhs but coordinated by professional officers, ranged far ahead of the main force to scout enemy positions and raid supply convoys. Al-Said's artillery batteries, mounted on trucks provided by the British, could rapidly deploy to support infantry attacks or bombardment enemy positions before moving to new locations. This mobility made it almost impossible for Ottoman forces to target Arab artillery with counter-battery fire. The psychological warfare was equally sophisticated. Arab officers used their knowledge of Ottoman military culture to craft propaganda that would demoralize enemy forces and encourage desertion. Leaflets in Arabic and Turkish promised amnesty to Ottoman soldiers who surrendered, while describing the futility of continued resistance. By September 1918, the Ottoman Empire was collapsing on all fronts. British forces under General Allenby were advancing through Palestine, while Arab forces moved north through the current Transjordan Plateau toward Damascus. The two armies coordinated their movements to trap Ottoman forces in southern Syria. The Arab Northern Army raced toward Damascus like a desert wind, covering over 400 kilometers in less than a month. Both al-Askari and al-Said played key roles in maintaining the logistics and coordination that made such rapid movement possible. For Arab officers trained in Ottoman military methods, this was their chance to prove that Arabs could conduct military operations as effectively as any European army. October 1st, 1918, Damascus, the ancient capital of the Umayyad Caliphate and the symbolic heart of Arab civilization, falls to combined British and Arab forces. For Arab officers who had dreamed of this moment in Ottoman military schools, the liberation of Damascus represented the fulfillment of centuries of suppressed aspirations. Faisal's forces entered the city in triumph, with Arab flags flying from buildings that had displayed Ottoman banners for 4 centuries. The streets filled with crowds cheering in Arabic, a language that had been systematically suppressed by Ottoman authorities in favor of Turkish. For a brief, shining moment, it seemed the British promises might be fulfilled. Arab officers who had sacrificed their careers and risked their lives for this moment allowed themselves to believe that they had achieved something unprecedented in modern Middle Eastern history, the liberation of Arab lands by Arab armies. The first betrayal, Sykes-Picot revealed. Then comes the first betrayal, delivered not by British diplomats, but by Russian revolutionaries who had their own scores to settle with European imperialism. The Sykes-Picot Agreement, negotiated secretly between Britain and France in May 1916, carved the region into European spheres of influence, directly contradicting the promises made to Hussein and his officers. The agreement, named after British diplomat Sir Mark Sykes and French diplomat François-Georges Picot, divided the Ottoman Empire's Arab territories into zones of direct and indirect European control. France would receive direct control over the Syrian coast and indirect control over the Syrian interior. Britain would receive direct control over southern Mesopotamia, modern-day Iraq, and indirect control over the area between Gaza and Kirkuk. When this treaty was exposed by the Bolsheviks in November 1917 as part of their campaign to embarrass the capitalist powers, discontent rippled through Arab ranks like a flash flood in the desert. Russian newspapers published the full text, which was immediately translated into Arabic and distributed throughout the Middle East. The revelation was devastating for Arab officers who had based their entire strategy on British promises of independence. The McMahon-Hussein correspondence had promised an Arab kingdom. Sykes-Picot delivered European colonial administration. The contradiction was impossible to reconcile. Yet they continued to fight, gambling that the facts on the ground, their victories, their sacrifices, their demonstrated capability, would override this paper agreement. Arab officers convinced themselves that Britain would honor its commitments to allies who had proven their worth on the battlefield. They lose that gamble spectacularly. After the war, the promised pan-Arab kingdom evaporates like a desert mirage. replaced by the harsh reality of European colonial administration dressed up in the language of League of Nations mandates. The Paris Peace Conference. Dreams deferred. The Paris Peace Conference of 1919 was supposed to be the moment when Woodrow Wilson's principle of self-determination would reshape the world. For Arab officers who had fought for the principle throughout the war, it seemed to offer one last chance to achieve the independence they had been promised. Faisal arrived in Paris as the representative of the Arab cause, accompanied by a delegation that included many of the officers who had made the revolt successful, T.E. Lawrence, now famous as Lawrence of Arabia, served as Faisal's advisor and translator, though his influence was already waning as British policy shifted toward accommodation with French demands. The Arab delegation presented detailed proposals for independent Arab states based on the territories they had liberated during the war. They argued that Arab forces had proven their capability for self-governance through their military achievements and their administration of captured territories. But the conference was dominated by European powers, more interested in dividing the spoils of victory than honoring wartime promises to non-European allies. France was determined to establish its control over Syria and Lebanon, viewing these territories as compensation for its enormous sacrifices on the Western Front. Britain was equally determined to control Iraq and Palestine for strategic and economic reasons. The mandate system, ostensibly designed to prepare former Ottoman territories for eventual independence, became a sophisticated form of colonial control that satisfied European ambitions while providing a veneer of international legitimacy. The French intervention in Syria for Faisal, who briefly rules as King of Syria from March to July 1920, the French intervention is swift and merciless. French colonial troops, many of them Senegalese and Moroccan soldiers experienced in colonial warfare, march from Lebanon toward Damascus with overwhelming superiority in artillery and aircraft. The Battle of Maysalun on the 24th of July, 1920, lasts only a few hours. Syrian forces under Defense Minister Yusuf al-Azma, another former Ottoman officer who had joined the Arab cause, are quickly overwhelmed by French firepower. Al-Azma himself is killed leading a cavalry charge against French machine gun positions, a romantic but futile gesture that symbolized the gap between Arab aspirations and European military technology. French colonial troops drive Faisal from Damascus into exile, ending the first independent Arab state in centuries after only 4 months of existence. The officers who had fought beside him scatter like leaves before a desert storm, their dreams of Arab unity seemingly crushed by the realities of European power politics. Many flee to British-controlled territories, where they hope to regroup and continue the struggle for Arab independence. Others go underground, beginning the resistance movements that would characterize the Mandate period. A few, broken by defeat and disillusionment, retire from political life entirely. But for many of these officers, the story doesn't end with the French conquest of Damascus. Instead, it enters a new phase that would prove even more complex and morally ambiguous than their original revolt against Ottoman rule. The Sharifian solution, compromise, and continuation. The British, ever pragmatic in their approach to imperial administration, turned to the very men they had trained and fought alongside. A 1921 conference in Cairo, presided over by Winston Churchill as colonial secretary, implements what becomes known as the Sharifian solution, a compromise that would salvage something from the wreckage of Arab hopes while serving British strategic interests. Churchill, whose romantic imagination had been captured by the desert campaigns, saw the Arab officers as natural allies in Britain's effort to control the Middle East at minimal cost. Rather than maintaining expensive military occupations, Britain could rely on friendly Arab governments led by men who owed their positions to British support. Faisal is installed as King of Iraq under British mandate, while his brother Abdullah becomes Emir of Transjordan. These appointments represented a partial fulfillment of British wartime promises, while ensuring that the new Arab states would remain within Britain's sphere of influence. The Cairo Conference also addressed the question of Palestine, where British promises to both Arabs and Jews had created an impossible situation. Churchill's solution was to separate Transjordan from Palestine and Qaus, creating a territory where Arab nationalism could be accommodated while preserving Palestine for the implementation of the Balfour Declaration. For Arab officers, the Sharifian solution represented both victory and defeat. They had achieved Arab independence, but only in artificially created states that bore little resemblance to the unified Arab kingdom they had envisioned. They would govern, but under British supervision and within borders drawn by European powers. Building Iraq, the challenge of nation building, and the officers of the Arab Revolt, they become the architects of these new nations, facing challenges that would test every skill they had learned in Ottoman military academies and British prisoner of war camps. Jafar al-Askari returns to Iraq with Faisal in June 1921. crossing the border from Syria into Mesopotamia in a special train provided by the British. The journey from Damascus to Baghdad retraces routes he had traveled as an Ottoman officer, but now he comes as a liberator rather than an occupier. His first appointment is as Minister of Defense in the new Iraqi government, a position that allows him to use his military expertise to build Iraq's army from the ground up. The challenge is immense, creating a national military force from the remnants of Ottoman units, tribal levies, and Arab Revolt veterans while maintaining the delicate sectarian and ethnic balance that characterizes Iraqi society. The Iraqi army that al-Askari creates reflects his Ottoman training, but incorporates lessons learned during the Arab Revolt. Officer training emphasizes both military professionalism and Arab nationalist ideology. The army becomes a vehicle for creating Iraqi national identity among men from diverse backgrounds: Sunni and Shia Arabs, Kurds, Turkmenic Tatars, and Christians. Al-Askari serves twice as prime minister, from November 1923 to August 1924, and again from November 1926 to January 1928. His tenure is marked by continuous struggle with the fundamental contradictions of the Iraqi state, wrestling with issues of conscription. He must balance the need for a strong national army against tribal resistance to central authority. Many Shia religious leaders oppose conscription as a violation of Islamic law, while Kurdish tribes view it as an attempt to suppress their autonomy. Al-Askari's solution is characteristically pragmatic. Exemptions for religious students and tribal quotas that allow traditional leaders to maintain face while contributing to national defense. Sectarian tensions prove even more challenging. Iraq's Shia majority had been largely excluded from Ottoman administrative positions, creating a pool of educated but resentful leaders who question the legitimacy of a Sunni monarch supported by Christian Europeans. Al-Askari's Dait Namak Qayyum, himself a Kurd and therefore somewhat outside these sectarian divisions, works to create inclusive institutions while maintaining the power structure that keeps the Hashemites and himself in control. Nuri al-Said, the political master. Nuri al-Said's trajectory proves even more remarkable than his former commanders. From 1921 to 1958, a span of 37 years, he dominates Iraqi politics like a colossus, serving 8 separate terms as prime minister and influencing every major decision in Iraqi governance. His political longevity stems from a combination of genuine administrative skill, ruthless pragmatism, and an uncanny ability to navigate between competing interests while maintaining British support. Unlike al-Askari, who remained primarily a military man, Nuri transforms himself into a sophisticated political operator who understands that power in the modern Middle East requires international backing. As a staunch monarchist and ally of Britain, he negotiates the Anglo-Iraqi Treaty of 1930 that grants nominal independence to Iraq while preserving British military bases and oil concessions. The treaty ends the British mandate but establishes a relationship that critics denounce as independence in quotation marks. Nuri's policies foster modernization while maintaining the power structure that serves British interests and Hashemite rule. He establishes Iraq's first university, builds railways connecting Baghdad to Damascus and Tehran, and creates modern banking and legal systems based on European models. His greatest achievement may be the Development Board, established in the 1950s, which channels oil revenues toward massive infrastructure projects. The board builds dams, irrigation canals, highways, and schools that transform Iraq from an Ottoman backwater into a modern state with growing international influence. But modernization comes at a political cost. Nuri's alliance with Britain makes him increasingly unpopular among Iraqis, who view the relationship as a continuation of foreign domination under a different name. His use of martial law and press censorship to suppress opposition alienates intellectuals and younger officers who had initially supported Arab nationalism. The pan-Arab dream continues. But these men haven't abandoned their pan-Arab dreams despite the failure to achieve unity during the revolt. Instead, they adapt their vision to the realities of the state system imposed by European powers, working to create mechanisms for cooperation between the artificial nations of the Middle East. Nuri al-Said continues advocating for Arab unity through diplomatic rather than military means, helping to establish the Arab League in 1945. The League, headquartered in Cairo and including all independent Arab states, represents a compromise between the dream of political unity and the reality of state sovereignty. The Arab League's founding charter reflects the influence of Arab Revolt veterans who staffed foreign ministries across the region. The organization's structure allows for coordination on common issues while respecting the sovereignty of member states, a solution that acknowledges the failure of pan-Arab political unity while maintaining the ideal of Arab cooperation. Jafar al-Askari pushes for greater Iraqi influence in the region through economic and military cooperation. developing transportation routes from Baghdad to Damascus and Amman that echo the old dreams of Arab unity. His plans for a Middle Eastern railway network connecting the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean represent a civilian version of the military campaigns he once led. The challenge for both men is reconciling their pan-Arab ideals with the pragmatic requirements of governing states, whose very existence depends on maintaining the post-war settlement. They must be Arab nationalists at home while remaining reliable allies of Britain abroad, a balancing act that becomes increasingly difficult as popular opinion turns against Western influence. The price of power. The price of power, however, is steep and growing steeper with each passing year. Both men face increasing criticism for their close ties to Britain, seen by many as the new imperial master replacing the Ottomans. The very British support that makes their rule possible also undermines their legitimacy among populations that increasingly view any association with European powers as betrayal. They're caught between their nationalist ideals and the pragmatic realities of governing states artificially created by European powers for European benefit. The borders of Iraq and Transjordan reflect British strategic interests rather than natural geographic or ethnic boundaries, creating internal tensions that require constant management. In Iraq, the Kurdish question becomes a permanent source of instability. Kurds had supported the Arab Revolt, hoping for autonomy within an Arab confederation, but find themselves a minority within an Arab-dominated state that views Kurdish aspirations as threats to national unity. Al-Askari's Kurdish background initially helps mediate these tensions, but his identification with Arab nationalism gradually alienates Kurdish leaders. The discovery of oil in northern Iraq during the 1920s transforms the stakes entirely. What had been a poor agricultural region becomes strategically vital to British interests, making Iraqi independence increasingly theoretical. The Iraq Petroleum Company, controlled by British, French, Dutch, and American interests, generates enormous revenues that should fund development but instead creates new forms of dependency. Both al-Askari and Nuri find themselves administering an economy they don't control, distributing oil revenues according to formulas dictated by foreign companies and governments. The contradiction between formal sovereignty and economic dependence becomes a source of constant political tension that their enemies exploit with devastating effect. The military coup era begins. Their fates reflect these mounting contradictions in ways that would define Middle Eastern politics for generations. October 29th, 1936, a date that will live in infamy in Iraqi history, marks the first military coup in Iraq's brief existence as an independent state. Brigadier General Bakr Sidki, a Kurdish officer who had served under both al-Askari and Nuri Bidistso, leads a coalition of junior officers, frustrated with civilian corruption and British influence. The coup represents the emergence of a new generation of Arab nationalist officers who view the Arab Revolt veterans as compromised figures, who had traded independence for personal power. Sidki's demands include genuine independence from Britain, land reform to benefit peasants rather than tribal sheikhs, and a more aggressive pan-Arab foreign policy. His movement attracts support from young intellectuals, urban workers, and junior military officers who feel excluded from the benefits of oil wealth. Jafar al-Askari, then serving as defense minister in a government he had helped create 15 years earlier, attempts to negotiate with the rebels in a meeting at the Ministry of Defense. His approach reflects the Ottoman military tradition he had learned in Istanbul: honor among officers, respect for hierarchy, and the possibility of resolving disputes through reasonable discussion. But these young officers have different ideas about honor and hierarchy. For them, al-Askari represents everything wrong with the post-war Middle East. A generation of leaders who had sold Arab independence for British gold and personal advancement. They see negotiation as weakness and compromise as betrayal. The confrontation ends tragically. Al-Askari, attempting to reason with army officers he once commanded, is shot point blank by Lieutenant Colonel Mohammed Salman, a man he had promoted and trusted. The assassination shocks Iraqi society and establishes a precedent for political violence that will characterize Middle Eastern politics for decades. Al-Askari's death symbolizes more than personal tragedy. It represents the failure of the Ottoman-trained generation to create stable institutions in the post-colonial Middle East. The military coup becomes the preferred method of political change, replacing the constitutional processes that al-Askari had tried to establish. Nuri's long survival and final fall. Nuri al-Said survives longer than his former commander through a combination of political skill, international support, and increasingly harsh police tactics against his opponents. His survival strategy involves playing different factions against each other while maintaining British backing and royal protection. The Bakr Sidki coup actually strengthens Nuri's position initially, as it eliminates rival politicians while demonstrating the dangers of political instability. Nouri positions himself as the indispensable man who can maintain order and protect foreign investments while pursuing gradual reform. His longevity also reflects the changing international situation. During World War II, Iraq's strategic location makes British support even more crucial. While the emergence of the Cold War gives Nouri new opportunities to position Iraq as a Western ally against Soviet influence, the Baghdad Pact of 1955, linking Iraq with Turkey, Iran, Pakistan, and Britain in an anti-Soviet alliance, represents the culmination of Nouri's foreign policy. For him, the pact fulfills the dream of making Iraq a major regional power while maintaining Western protection against both Soviet expansion and radical Arab nationalism. But the pact also makes Nouri a target for the pan-Arab movement led by Egypt's Gamal Abdel Nasser, who views alliance with former colonial powers as betrayal of Arab independence. Radio Cairo broadcasts into Iraq portray Nouri as a British puppet who has sold Iraqi sovereignty for personal gain. The 1956 Suez Crisis crystallizes opposition to Nouri's policies. When Britain, France, and Israel attack Egypt, Iraqi public opinion overwhelmingly supports Nasser against the Western powers. Nouri's government is forced to condemn the attack while privately maintaining support for Britain, a contradiction that exposes the fundamental illegitimacy of his position. Popular demonstrations throughout Iraq during the Suez Crisis reveal the depth of opposition to Nouri's policies. Students, workers, and even junior military officers openly express support for Nasser and condemnation of Western imperialism. The monarchy's position becomes increasingly precarious as it loses legitimacy among the very populations it claims to represent. But on July 14th, 1958, another military coup, led by Brigadier Abd al-Karim Qasim and Colonel Abd al-Salam Arif, finally topples the monarchy that Nouri had served for nearly 4 decades. The coup begins before dawn with the assassination of King Faisal II, Crown Prince Abd al-Ilah, and other members of the royal family at the Rehab Palace. The Hashemite monarchy, established by the British 37 years earlier, is extinguished in a matter of minutes. Nouri al-Said, the ultimate survivor, manages to escape the initial roundup. For a day, the most powerful man in Iraq is a fugitive in his own capital. A massive manhunt ensues, with the new revolutionary government offering a reward for his capture. Knowing his fate if caught, Nouri attempts to flee disguised as a woman, veiled in an abaya. But his shoes, distinctly male, give him away. He is identified by a mob in a Baghdad street on July 15th. Accounts differ on whether he shot himself or was gunned down by soldiers, but his end was unequivocal. His body was buried that evening, only to be disinterred the next day by an enraged crowd that dragged it through the streets of Baghdad before hanging and mutilating it. The brutal demise of Nouri al-Said marked the violent end of an era. The generation of Ottoman-trained Arab officers who had gambled on the Arab Revolt was gone. They were men who had traded one empire for another, believing they could build modern nations through pragmatic compromise with the West. They succeeded in creating the institutions of statehood, armies, ministries, and parliaments, but failed to win the lasting loyalty of their people. Their legacy remains one of bitter irony. These forgotten officers were the founders of the modern Arab state system. Yet they were ultimately consumed by the very forces they had helped to unleash: a politicized military and a radicalized Arab nationalism that rejected any compromise with the West. They were professional soldiers caught between crumbling empires and rising nations, architects of a future they would not live to see, and whose foundations, laid in the shifting sands of imperial promises and post-war betrayals, would prove tragically unstable for decades to come.